June 15th, 2023, a date that would shake an entire community to its core. That afternoon, 32-year-old Chad Dorman came home early from work. He asked his wife and their 3 young sons to join him in the main bedroom for a nap, something that, on the surface, seemed completely harmless. But what happened next was unimaginable. As they lay down, Dorman quietly got up, opened his gun safe, and pulled out a rifle. Without warning, he turned and fired, shooting his oldest son, Hunter, twice. Hunter died instantly. In a panic, his wife rushed to help him and screamed at their other 2 boys to run, go, hoping to save their lives. At that same moment, Dorman's teenage stepdaughter, who'd been watching TV in another room, heard the gunfire and ran toward the chaos. She saw everything. She grabbed Clayton, urging him to keep running, but Dorman followed them out into a nearby field. He shot Clayton in the back, and then, in an act of chilling cruelty, fired again at close range. Afterward, he picked up Clayton's body and carried it back to the yard. Meanwhile, his stepdaughter ran back into the house, scooped up the youngest boy, Chase, and bolted toward the road, desperate to get help. Dorman chased after her, rifle in hand. He pointed the gun at her and shouted for her to put Chase down. When he pulled the trigger, click. The rifle jammed. He was out of bullets. Chase broke free and ran toward his mother, who was still trying desperately to save Clayton. His stepdaughter flagged down a passing car, screaming for help, then sprinted to the nearby Monroe Township Fire Department. But back at the house, things took an even darker turn. Dorman went inside, retrieved Hunter's body, and laid him next to Clayton in the yard. He then tried to rip Chase from his wife's arms, biting her in the struggle. When she grabbed for the rifle, Dorman fired, hitting her in the hand. She fell, and as she dropped Chase, he shot him too. He then placed Chase's body beside his brother's, sat down on the porch steps, and watched silently as his wife screamed and tried to bring her sons back. By the time police arrived at 4:25 p.m., it was too late. Chad Dorman was born in 1990 in Ohio, the only child of Kit and Gloria Dorman. To those who knew him growing up, he seemed like an ordinary kid, the center of his parents' world. He came from a middle-class family, did okay in school, not remarkable, but steady. He wasn't known to cause trouble. But as Chad grew older, something inside him began to change. As Chad got older, the cracks started to show. He developed a drinking habit, the kind that made him reckless behind the wheel. Traffic violations piled up, one after another. Fines, warnings, even a hit and run after he crashed his car and fled the scene. He ignored multiple court summons, pretending the problems would just disappear. Then came 2010, his first major brush with the law. Chad was accused of domestic violence against his own father, but his dad refused to testify, unwilling to see his only son behind bars. The case was dropped. It wouldn't be the last time. Not long after, another domestic violence allegation surfaced, this time from a woman he'd been seeing. Again, nothing came of it. No testimony, no conviction. Just another ugly moment quietly swept under the rug. For a while, though, it looked like Chad might finally be turning things around. He met Laura, fell deeply in love, and for the first time seemed genuinely happy. Laura already had a daughter, Alexis, from a previous marriage. But Chad didn't seem to mind. He embraced her as part of the family. Before long, they built a life together in a quiet neighborhood in Monroe, Clermont County. Over the next few years, their family grew. 3 boys, Clayton, Hunter, and Chase, each one full of energy, laughter, and love. By early 2023, Chad was 32, Laura was 34, Alexis was 16, and the boys were 7, 4, and 3. From the outside, they looked like any other happy family. Backyard barbecues, baseball practice, movie nights. The kind of home where neighbors wave from their driveways and kids play until sunset. Clayton and Hunter were inseparable. Both loved baseball. Their coach would later talk about how bright and full of life they were, always smiling, always giving their best. Clayton was the serious one, focused, steady, a natural leader. He was the kid who'd cheer for everyone on the team, not just himself. When he wasn't at practice, he loved building Lego sets, racing his go-kart, and taking care of his little brothers. Hunter, on the other hand, was pure energy. The family prankster. The one always running around barefoot in the yard, splashing in the creek, or bouncing on the trampoline until the sun went down. He had this big heart, always hugging his mom and sister, always telling them how much he loved them. It was the kind of simple, joyful life every parent dreams of giving their kids. But behind closed doors, cracks were starting to reappear. Even little Chase, though just a toddler, was the heart of their world. He had this wild imagination, always pretending to be a superhero, cape or no cape. When he wasn't lost in his own little adventures, he was right beside his mom. Laura and Chase shared a special bond, the kind you could see in every glance, every laugh, every quiet moment between them. To the outside world, the Dormans seemed like the picture of a loving family. Neighbors often commented on how close they were, how happy they looked together, smiling at the park, cheering at ball games, always giving off that sense of warmth and togetherness. But behind closed doors, things were very different. Neighbors later recalled hearing Chad yelling, sometimes at Laura, sometimes at the kids. The shouting became so frequent, it was almost part of the background noise of the neighborhood. Friends who knew them privately said Chad's temper was getting worse, describing him as a ticking time bomb. Eventually, the abuse got so bad that Laura threatened to leave. But Chad, desperate to keep up appearances, made sure no one outside the home saw the cracks. In early June 2023, he even changed his Facebook profile picture, a photo of his 3 sons smiling proudly. Not long after, he shared more posts, including one taken at the baseball field. Clayton, Hunter, and Chase grinning, giving thumbs up, the kind of wholesome family photo that hides everything it doesn't show. At the time, no one thought much of it. It just looked like another happy family post. And those who knew about Chad's anger, they stayed quiet, hoping maybe things were getting better. On Wednesday, June 14th, the kids had a baseball game. Chad and Laura were both there, cheering from the sidelines while Chase played nearby. Parents in the stands saw a normal family, laughing, smiling, proud of their boys. The head of the local sports association even remembered Chad helping the kids buckle into their car seats afterward, calm, attentive, and responsible. No one could have imagined it, but that was the last time anyone outside the family would see the boys alive. The very next day, June 15th, Chad came home early from work. He asked Laura and the kids to join him in the master bedroom for a nap. They all climbed into bed together, unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. In the living room, Laura's 12-year-old daughter sat watching TV, completely unaware that her life and her family were about to change forever. After everyone drifted off to sleep, Chad quietly opened the drawer of his nightstand. Inside was a small safe. He unlocked it and pulled out a rifle. Then, without warning, he woke his 3 sons and told them to stand in line, with Hunter in front. What happened next is almost beyond comprehension. Chad raised the rifle and shot Hunter twice. The little boy collapsed instantly. The gunfire jolted Laura awake, confused, terrified. She screamed and threw herself toward Hunter, trying to help him, but there was nothing she could do. In a panic, she shouted for her other 2 sons to run. In the next room, Alexis, who had been watching TV, froze as the shots echoed through the house. She sprinted toward the bedroom and saw her stepfather chasing Clayton down the hall. Without hesitation, she ran after them. Clayton bolted toward a nearby field, his small legs pumping, desperate to escape. But Chad caught up to him. Witnesses would later describe it like a pursuit, a father hunting his own son. Chad raised the rifle again. One shot hit Clayton in the back. The boy fell. Chad fired again, this time at close range, ending his life. He then carried Clayton's lifeless body back toward the house, expressionless. Alexis, seeing the horror unfold, rushed back inside to find Chase, determined to save him. She grabbed his hand and ran toward the road, hoping to flag down help. But before they could reach safety, Chad caught up. He aimed the rifle and barked at Alexis to put Chase down. She refused. He pulled the trigger, but the gun just clicked. Empty. At that same moment, Laura was outside in the yard, desperately trying to revive Clayton, even though she must have known it was too late. Alexis quickly set Chase down and told him to run to his mom. "Go to her now," she shouted. "I'll get help." The little boy sprinted across the yard, straight into his mother's arms. Meanwhile, Chad went back inside the house to reload. When he came back out, he carried Hunter's body and laid him beside Clayton's in the yard. Then he turned toward Laura and Chase once again. He tried to pull Chase away from his mother. Laura fought back with everything she had. During the struggle, Chad bit her hand, then aimed the rifle and fired, the bullet tearing through her thumb. In agony, Laura dropped Chase. And in that awful moment, Chad raised the rifle one last time and shot his youngest son in the head. After the killings, Chad calmly placed Chase's body beside his brother's. Then, as if nothing had happened, he sat down on the porch steps, cold, expressionless, watching as Laura tried desperately to bring their children back to life. By 4:14 p.m., the reality hit her. There was nothing more she could do. In a state of panic and heartbreak, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911, screaming into the receiver that her babies were gone. Investigators would later determine that Chad fired 9 shots in total. One of the boys struck once, the other 2, 4 times each. Meanwhile, Alexis was sprinting toward the Monroe fire station, her cries echoing through the neighborhood. A nearby driver saw her, pulled over, and asked what was wrong. Through tears, Alexis could barely speak, but she managed to say, "My stepdad killed everyone at home." The driver offered her a ride, but Alexis refused. She couldn't leave her family behind. She just kept running, desperate to get help. The neighbor immediately called police dispatch, reporting what she'd just heard. When asked if she could approach the house, she said no, terrified that Chad might still be shooting. By then, 911 operators had already received multiple calls about gunfire coming from the Dorman home, and officers were on their way. Neighbors started to gather in their yards, confusion and fear spreading through the street. No one yet understood the scale of what had happened, only that something horrific was unfolding next door. Around 4:30 p.m., police finally arrived. What they saw would haunt them forever. Chad Dorman sat calmly on the front steps, the rifle resting in his hands. When officers ordered him to stand, he didn't resist. In fact, he confessed right there on the spot, admitting what he'd done and quietly asking them to take him to jail. As Chad was led away, officers rushed toward the yard, where the 3 children lay motionless on the grass. Each had suffered fatal gunshot wounds. Paramedics arrived and immediately began CPR, their voices urgent, commanding, but there was no response. Within minutes, the truth no one wanted to face was confirmed. All 3 boys were gone. Their focus then turned to Laura, who was bleeding heavily from a gunshot wound to her hand, the same hand she had used to fight for her sons' lives. Though her injury wasn't life-threatening, it was serious enough to require immediate care. Laura was rushed to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center, screaming at Chad as paramedics lifted her into the ambulance, shouting that he had destroyed her life. Chad's arrest went quietly. He didn't resist, but his behavior was unsettling. As officers led him away, he warned them about the family dog, calmly telling the animal to go back inside, as if nothing unthinkable had just happened. Before long, yellow police tape surrounded the property. Investigators secured the scene and prepared to return the next day for a full forensic sweep. That night, Chad Dorman was officially charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder. When investigators came back the following morning, they found no signs of forced entry, confirming that Chad had acted entirely alone. In his initial confession, Chad spoke coldly, emotionless. He admitted that he'd been planning to kill his children since the previous October, and claimed he hadn't slept for 3 days before finally carrying out his plan. Haunted by whatever darkness drove him, Chad appeared in court on June 16th, wearing a padded green vest designed to prevent self-harm. He was escorted by 6 deputies, not because he posed a threat to others, but because no one could predict what he might do next. In front of the judge, Chad openly confessed again. He said he had lined up his 3 sons before shooting them, describing the act as though he were recounting something ordinary. Witness statements from neighbors were also presented, including one who'd seen Clayton running for his life before being shot down by his own father. The evidence against Chad was overwhelming. Still, his defense requested bail, just $75,000, arguing that his ties to the area and lack of steady employment made him unlikely to flee. But prosecutors weren't having it. They called for a record-setting $20 million bail, insisting Chad should never be free again. The judge agreed. The Clermont County Prosecutor's Office described the killings as the most horrific crime they had ever seen. A complete betrayal of the sacred trust between a parent and their children. Those boys had looked to him for love, for safety, for guidance, and he repaid that trust in the most devastating way imaginable. The prosecutor didn't hold back. He spoke with raw emotion about the sheer brutality of the murders, especially Chad's decision to chase down his own son, Clayton, and execute him in cold blood. He also turned his attention to the community, criticizing how obvious red flags had been ignored for years. how no one had stepped in despite clear signs of Chad's violent behavior. By the end of that hearing, Chad faced 9 counts of aggravated murder, 1 for every bullet he fired, along with 8 counts of kidnapping and 4 counts of assault. He was transferred to the Clermont County Jail as the investigation deepened. Just a week later, on June 23rd, a grand jury formally indicted him on 21 charges in total. Public outrage only grew when Chad entered a plea of not guilty. The prosecutor announced that the aggravated murder charges made Chad eligible for the death penalty. He also demanded that bail be permanently revoked, arguing that no sum of money could ever reflect the horror of what Chad had done. The case drew national attention. News outlets camped outside the courthouse. Crowds gathered with signs demanding justice, their anger echoing through the small Ohio town. But public opinion was divided. Some demanded the death penalty, believing it was the only fitting punishment. Others thought a life sentence would be worse, that Chad should be forced to live every day haunted by the weight of his actions. Still, nearly everyone agreed on one thing: he deserved the harshest punishment possible. Even in the middle of the national outrage, one person stood by Chad, his father. In interviews, he described his son's actions as the result of a mental breakdown, claiming this wasn't the Chad he knew. But his words directly contradicted Chad's own confession, that he'd been planning the killings for months. Meanwhile, Laura and her family were left shattered, trying to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer existed. Alexis, the 12-year-old stepdaughter who had witnessed everything, required intensive trauma counseling to even begin processing what she'd seen. Laura's sister, Rachel, launched a GoFundMe campaign to help with funeral costs. In her message, she wrote that while justice might eventually come for Chad, no trial, no sentence, and no verdict could ever mend their broken hearts. All they had left were memories of 3 little boys whose laughter once filled their home, and a silence that would never fade. On June 25th, the New Richmond Sports Association organized a vigil at the local baseball field, the same place where Clayton and Hunter used to play. Families gathered beneath the setting sun, holding candles and wearing shirts printed with the boys' names. The organization sold those t-shirts to raise funds for Laura and her family, but more than that, it was a way for the community to show love, to remind Laura she wasn't alone. Outside the Dorman home, the yard turned into a sea of tributes. Neighbors and strangers alike left behind toys, flowers, baseballs, candles, and handwritten notes. Small tokens of affection for 3 little boys who'd been taken far too soon. The next day, June 26th, a memorial service was held at the First Baptist Church. Laura made one simple request: that everyone wear bright, colorful clothing. She didn't want a sea of black. She wanted the room to feel like her sons' lives, full of energy, laughter, and light. But even with the bright colors, the weight of grief was impossible to ignore. The air inside the church was heavy with sorrow. The children's classmates and teammates sat quietly, unable to comprehend how something so unthinkable could happen to friends they had just played with weeks before. During the service, the boys' baseball coach stepped up to speak. His voice trembled as he shared stories about the brothers, their energy, their kindness, their jokes during practice. He talked about Clayton's determination, Hunter's sense of humor, and Chase's wide-eyed wonder. They brought joy wherever they went, he said. And there's no replacing that. Months later, on September 22nd, the legal process moved forward. During a pretrial hearing, the court officially set Chad Dorman's trial for July 8, 2024, with proceedings expected to continue until August 12th of that year. Until then, Chad would remain behind bars at the Clermont County Jail, awaiting the trial that would decide his fate. With Chad's bail still set at $20 million, the question that haunts everyone remains the same: why? To this day, no one truly understands what drove him to do something so unthinkable, to take the lives of his own children. Some reports suggest it may have been an act of revenge against Laura, who was allegedly planning to leave him because of his growing violence and instability. But Chad has never confirmed or denied those claims. In fact, he's refused to cooperate with investigators from the very beginning, leaving the true motive shrouded in silence. Then, in February 2024, a surprising twist came during a court hearing. Chad's defense team filed a motion to suppress his statements to police, arguing that his rights were violated during interrogation. The judge agreed, ruling that Chad's recorded confessions, including the moments where he admitted to killing his 3 sons, couldn't be used in court. It was a gut punch for those following the case, another layer of frustration in a tragedy already too painful to comprehend. And as of now, the mystery of why Chad Dorman did what he did still has no clear answer. If you found this case as haunting and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We post new true crime stories every night, real cases, real people, and the lessons hidden behind the headlines. Until next time, stay sharp and stay vigilant.